He was a middle-aged man looking for Ms. Wright.
He was a great person. You can ask anybody.
She was a single mother searching for a fresh start.
Just trying to make a living for herself and for her children.
From the moment these two lonely hearts met, sparks flew.
He said it was just like love at first sight.
But just when their steamy love affair seemed destined for new heights,
He was starting to talk about marriage.
a shocking crime would bring their lives crashing back down.
There's blood everywhere. It's just really a gruesome, gruesome scene.
But who was behind this vicious crime? A desperate search for the assailant unearths a scandal from the past and proves one of these starry-eyed lovers wasn't who they claimed to be.
I call it the scarlet letter that she wears that'll always haunt her.
April 3rd, 2011, 2:30 a.m. It's a warm spring morning in the college town of Durham, North Carolina. But at an apartment complex on the south side of the city, trouble is brewing. It starts when resident Carlos Wilson is jolted awake by someone knocking on his sliding glass door.
Carlos!
Peering outside, he sees his neighbor and beloved uncle, 46-year-old Reginald Day.
Reginald was at the door. I open it and immediately I see him bleeding and gasping for air.
Oh, man! Oh, my God, what happened to you?
To Carlos's horror, it appears his uncle has been stabbed in his side.
I was hysterical, but I tried to keep Reggie calm. I held his wound, made the 911 call.
911, where's your emergency?
I need an ambulance to Citrus Oaks Drive. My uncle just got stabbed.
Is he awake?
Yeah, but he needs help bad.
Police and paramedics are on the scene within minutes.
Hey, man, what happened?
Oh, man. He got stabbed.
Mr. Day was bleeding heavily from a wound right under his armpit.
Attempting to staunch his blood loss, they immediately transport Reggie to a nearby trauma center.
They proceeded to take him immediately to Duke Medical Center, where he was operated on by the emergency personnel.
With Reggie in surgery and his fate uncertain, officers try and ascertain what had transpired.
Tell us what happened.
Speaking to Carlos Wilson, they learn that Reggie lives in a nearby apartment with his 32-year-old girlfriend, Crystal Mangum, and her 3 children.
Where's Crystal and the kids now?
I don't know.
Officers race to Reggie and Crystal's apartment. There's no sign of Crystal or her kids, but what they find is deeply disturbing.
We're gonna need to call for backup.
Go ahead and advise major crimes and x-ray.
It's as if a tornado was in the inside of the apartment.
We have knives and weapons all over the floor.
When detectives arrive, it doesn't take them long to see that there's been some sort of struggle.
The first thing they see are knives everywhere. Knives on the couch, broken knives, blade here, a handle there.
They called in forensics, the SBI, and the rest of them to take pictures to test the knives and things like that.
They could tell that something very violent and something very aggressive had happened.
Interviewing neighbors, investigators discover there were sounds of an altercation coming from the apartment earlier that evening.
Arguing and fighting.
But that's not all.
And there was another voice, and it was a male.
They heard a third voice, and this was a mystery voice. Nobody knew who this voice belonged to.
But who is this mystery man? And more importantly, where is Reggie's girlfriend, Crystal Mangum?
They didn't know a whole lot at that point, so there were certainly a lot of questions.
But when police start digging for answers, they strike a nerve with everyone in the city of Durham and unearth a scandal involving a prestigious university. A scandal folks in Durham thought they'd buried for good.
See Crystal Mangum?
See Crystal Mangum.
Born and raised in Durham, and the youngest of 3 children, Crystal Gail Mangum never strove to be the center of attention.
Crystal is really a kind-hearted, good person. Kind of quiet demeanor, not some loud, boisterous, outspoken person.
Bright and pretty, Crystal did well at Durham's Hillside High School until a traumatic event threw her life off course.
There was a gentleman older, much older than she was, that took interest in her and at some point assaulted her. She ended up in a relationship that she shouldn't have been in. It would have been statutory rape. There were charges pressed, but the parents were encouraged to not pursue the case, so those charges were dropped.
Ironically, her own father indicated that he didn't believe that it was true. So we're talking about your parents, the people that you expect to support you, and they're the very first people that are saying, no, I don't believe you, Crystal.
Anxious for a new start, Crystal was determined to put as much space as she could between her and her hometown. So after high school, she joined the Navy.
Crystal was trained as a radar specialist. They sent her to California. She ended up on one of their boats, the USS Monkhood.
But Crystal's naval career was cut short after an embarrassing affair with a married naval officer resulted in 2 children. Though Crystal received an honorable discharge, she ended her affair with the officer and abruptly returned to Durham with her children. Crystal went back to school and earned a degree in criminal psychology. But even with a diploma in hand, the single mother was struggling to make ends meet.
She still had a very hard time finding employment.
By 2010, Crystal had weathered another failed relationship and had a 3rd child to support.
She was living with her aunt, and, it was a crowded situation.
But in January of 2011, Crystal's run of bad luck took an unexpected turn when she met a successful 46-year-old residential painter named Reginald Day.
They met when he came to the house where she lived at to do a paint job. What's your name?
I'm Crystal.
Hey, nice to meet you, Reggie.
He was a loving friend, and he was a great person. He had a shirt off his back.
Reggie had a wide network of friends in Durham, but he'd never found the woman of his dreams.
Uncle was very depressed about not having to wake up to someone. He wanted a wife and kids. He was looking for love.
By the time Reginald Day had finished his paint job, he and Crystal had formed a connection.
I just got a big empty apartment by myself.
By yourself?
He was behind on rent, and Crystal had some money saved up, and she let him know that I can help you catch it up if you allow me to, move in.
Reggie jumped at the opportunity. Just 3 weeks later, Crystal and her children moved into Reggie's apartment. It didn't take long for the sparks to start flying.
They just kind of fell into a relationship. She said one night they were just sitting there talking, watching TV, having a few drinks, and, things happen.
So the kids sleep?
Yeah, I put them in bed.
It became romantic and, eventually crossed a threshold.
A devoted boyfriend, 3 adoring children, a good home. By the spring of 2011, it seemed Crystal Mangum was finally living the life she'd always imagined.
He was a really good man to her, and she cared about him a lot. He was starting to talk about marriage, even though they had been together for just a couple of months.
But just when Crystal and Reggie's whirlwind romance seems destined for the altar, another storm begins to brew. A storm that would rip the roof off their relationship, exposing a closet full of skeletons. For lovers Crystal Mangum and Reggie Day, the spring of 2011 wasn't just a chance to celebrate the end of another long winter. It also marked the 6-week anniversary of their whirlwind romance.
Reggie had a ready-made family in about a week of knowing her.
But in the early morning hours of April 3rd, 2011, their lives took a tragic turn when a blood-soaked Reggie shows up at his nephew's apartment, the victim of an apparent knife attack.
It was very traumatic for me to witness that to your own family member.
Reggie is rushed to a nearby hospital where surgeons fight to save his life. Meanwhile, officers have just discovered that Crystal and her 3 children have gone missing from the couple's nearby apartment.
She was gone. They needed to find Crystal wherever she was at.
Adding to the mystery, neighbors have reported hearing an argument, along with the voice of an unknown male that seemed to be coming from inside the apartment earlier in the evening.
At that point, police needed to know if he was involved and who he was and what was he doing there.
While detectives expand their search for Crystal and the unidentified man, investigators scour her and Reggie's apartment in search of any evidence that might offer clues about the attack.
There was knives on the couch. There was knives in the bedroom. There was knives in the hallway. There was blood trails in the hallway.
Near one of the bloodstains, investigators find a clump of human hair, along with a weapon that appears to have been used in the attack on Reggie.
The knife was just an ordinary kitchen knife, maybe about 6 inches long.
After tagging the evidence, detectives continue into the master bedroom.
They saw the mattress off the bed and that it had some blood on it.
The whole frame of the door was off, and there was a big hole in the middle of the door. That had to take force.
It's obvious to investigators that a fight had taken place in the apartment, but it's unclear who inflicted the damage and why. Though investigators have a hunch that the instigator of this attack is male.
Men are generally naturally can be more aggressive than women.
Could this be a domestic dispute gone horribly wrong? Or is there something much darker at hand? With an unknown man still at large, police aren't certain. As for Reggie's friends and family, who've gathered outside the apartment, they find it impossible to believe that someone could have targeted Reggie on purpose, or that he himself was involved in some sort of domestic assault.
I never witnessed any violent behavior from Reggie in any of his relationships.
He was just truly amazing. He would give you his last dime. He was just a good person.
Reggie's friends and family tell police that just hours earlier that evening, Reggie and Crystal had attended a party for one of his relatives.
It was a birthday party for a cousin of mine.
Crystal and Reginald were having an amazing time at a party. They were drinking, having fun, letting loose.
As far as friends could tell, the couple had never seemed happier.
They weren't fighting at the party. They weren't fighting en route to the party.
While no one knows what happened after the couple returned home, friends and family are quick to remind police that the woman at the center of Reggie's love life was no stranger to controversy.
Who's his girlfriend?
Crystal Mangum, the Crystal Mangum.
I explained to that was the Crystal Mangum.
In Durham, most people know who Crystal is.
In fact, 5 years earlier, Crystal had been involved in a scandal that rocked Durham and prestigious Duke University to its core.
The Duke lacrosse scandal was something that was heard nationally, not something that was just isolated to North Carolina.
It all started one night in March of 2006, when Crystal and another woman attended a party for Duke's varsity men's lacrosse team, but not as guests.
Crystal was being hired to strip or dance for the Duke lacrosse players.
It was a job the single mother had secretly been doing on and off since 2002.
That's $400 or $500 you put in your pocket. You got children, you got bills. You know, I go dance for a couple of hours, I go home.
But according to a statement Crystal filed with police the following morning, the party went terribly awry.
The lacrosse team had ordered specifically Caucasian strippers. In return, they receive an African-American and an Asian stripper.
Wait a minute. No touching, pretty boy.
No, we paid.
Crystal alleged the lacrosse players were unhappy, and an argument ensued, during which time she and the other woman were called racial slurs. But that wasn't the most shocking charge Crystal brought against the team.
She accused the Duke lacrosse members of sexually raping her.
Specifically, Crystal claimed she'd been violated by 3 Duke players. Within days, the Durham district attorney brought charges against the young men. Durham exploded.
You have a young black lady saying that 3 white guys raped her. The whole town was divided.
Half of them believing that something did happen and feeling sorry for her, and the other half angry.
The case got national attention, but as the investigation unfolded, private detectives hired by the accused players began to poke holes in Crystal's story. They discovered major discrepancies between what she told police and the evidence CSI uncovered.
The evidence did not back up her story that she was raped.
The Attorney General publicly said there wasn't enough evidence to pursue this case and that he was declaring that the young men were innocent.
The whole town was embarrassed by how it turned out.
After her allegations proved false, Crystal became a pariah in Durham.
She thought that everything would be okay. I'd go find a job, good job. That didn't happen.
Once they found out she was a young lady involved with the Duke lacrosse, they would fire her.
Crystal's past certainly raises questions about her potential involvement in the attack on Reggie. But the most pressing issue for investigators is, where is Crystal now?
They were looking for her and her 3 children.
But before police could pinpoint the whereabouts of Crystal and her children, detectives would get help from an unlikely source, catapulting this disturbing case in a stunning new direction.
And what is your name, please? Please just hurry up and get here. It really is a lot of trouble, and we just need you to get here really seriously.
April 3rd, 2011. Shortly after attending a family party, 46-year-old Reggie Day was brutally stabbed in the abdomen. After investigating Reggie's apartment, Durham police are now looking for his girlfriend, a woman involved in one of the city's most notorious scandals.
This was the Crystal Mangum, the same Crystal Mangum at the center of the Duke lacrosse controversy.
While Reggie fights for his life at Duke Medical Center, police are racing to find Crystal, as well as a mysterious man neighbors claim they heard shortly before the attack.
If someone else was in the house, did someone else commit this crime? Was a child involved?
If there was a 3rd person in the apartment at that time, there's really no way of knowing what happened.
But as police work to determine the other man's identity, a 911 dispatcher receives a disturbing emergency call.
Durham 911, where's your emergency? This man was trying to beat up on my mom, and my mom was trying to defend herself, and she accidentally stabbed him. Okay, and what is your name, please? Please just hurry up and get here.
Concerned, dispatchers immediately trace the call. They discover the number is listed to a Durham resident named Liddy Howard, and the address is less than a block away from Reggie's apartment. Racing to the scene, police converge outside Liddy Howard's residence.
Yes.
Ma'am, we're here responding to a 911 call.
When they step into the living room, officers make a stunning discovery.
They come in, and Crystal Magnum was laying on the living room floor.
Crystal, I need you to look up at me and talk to me.
They called out to her, and she didn't respond, almost like she was asleep.
Crystal, can you stand up?
They had to help her up. She was just out of it.
Having finally found Crystal, officers inquire about the welfare of her children. Fortunately, they're all okay. In fact, Crystal's son is the one who placed the 911 call.
Miss Howard was caring for Crystal's 3 children that night. She didn't live very far away.
While first responders attend to a dazed and seemingly traumatized Crystal Mangum, police ask Liddy Howard about the events of the evening. She explains Crystal had dropped off her kids earlier before leaving for Reggie's party.
Was she okay when she dropped the kids off?
She was fine when she dropped the kids off, and she came home around 4 a.m. and she looked like she had been in a fight.
She walked through the door. She said, Red just hit her. Just hit her.
She was distraught. She was in tears. She basically said her boyfriend was beating her and she stabbed him.
She was claiming self-defense, that he had beat her up.
But when police examine Crystal, they see no blatant signs of physical injury. They ask Crystal to describe Reggie's attack on her, but a seemingly groggy Crystal has trouble answering their questions.
The officers had to keep asking her questions. She was falling asleep. She was maybe stumbling over her words or asking, where am I?
Officers transport Crystal to police headquarters for further questioning. But even after arriving at the station, Crystal offers up little information.
I need you to tell me exactly what happened.
Look, I am in pain.
Crystal complains of pain in her face and arm where she says Reggie attacked her. but she refuses to say anything else without an attorney present.
Crystal, who unfortunately had experience with the legal system, did what every defense lawyer in the world would advise, which is not talk.
Right now, I need you to tell me exactly what happened.
I'm not gonna say nothing until I talk to my lawyer.
They took pictures of her, the condition that she was in, the condition that her clothes was in. Was there any blood on her? Was there any marks, apparent marks on her?
Detectives are beginning to think Crystal is hiding something. They hold her in an interrogation room, but they have little concrete evidence connecting her to the crime. That is, until they receive a call from the officers back at the couple's apartment. A surprising new witness has come forward. Durham police officer Christopher King.
He somehow communicated with them to make it clear that he had been there earlier that night.
Officer King tells investigators that he'd been at the couple's apartment complex around 2 a.m., overseeing the towing of an abandoned vehicle. That's when he encountered Crystal and Reggie returning home from their family party.
Hey, don't I know you? How you doing?
She recognized him as a police officer she knew, and she went over to the car.
Crystal said hi to him, which apparently set Reggie off on a jealousy issue, and he started yelling.
Crystal, who is this dude you talking to?
He was cursing and hurling insults, and he was like, "You're cheating on me."
All I know is every time I turn my back, you always talking to another guy.
You are seeing insecure.
Hey. You ought to go to tone it down, and you got to take it inside.
The police officer said, "You two need to take that in the house, take that on in the house." And that's what they did.
For detectives, it's a stunning turn of events.
When detectives interviewed the officer, they realized that he was the third voice.
And if Officer King's statement is accurate, perhaps Crystal is telling the truth about being assaulted by Reggie. But how did Reggie end up on the wrong end of a bloody steak knife? Had Crystal stabbed him in self-defense? Or had she or someone else attacked Reggie in cold blood? Unfortunately, Officer King can shed little light on what transpired after he left the scene.
From the time they got in the house, it becomes a he said, she said story because the only people who were there to speak on that was Reggie and Crystal.
With Crystal refusing to speak with police, detectives know the only person who can shed light on what really happened is Reggie Day. Unfortunately, Reggie's condition is about to take a dramatic turn, one that gives investigators pause and makes them wonder, in this bloody encounter, who was the predator and who was the prey?
He said he kicked the door in on the bathroom and dragged her out by the hair.
After weathering a very public dispute over the Duke lacrosse allegations, Crystal Mangum was looking for a fresh start and a man who could love her despite her checkered past. She found that man in Reggie Day.
After that Duke lacrosse fiasco, Crystal decided that after all of that, she needed to get her life back on track.
I was like, wow, for real? Do you know who this girl is? He told me, yeah, Nip, everybody need a second chance.
But has Reggie's kindness toward Crystal ultimately done him in? In the early morning hours of April 3rd, 2011, Reggie showed up at his nephew's house with a gruesome stab wound.
Reggie was standing before me, holding his wound, his frail body. He told me Crystal stabbed him.
Crystal claims no knowledge of the stabbing and instead tells police that Reggie had assaulted her.
Crystal said conflict became physical. Reggie grabbed her, he held her down.
I need to talk to my lawyer.
At that point, she had exercised her right to an attorney.
Police are desperate to hear Reggie's version of events. But with Reggie fighting for his life at Duke Medical Center, they're worried they might never get the chance. Fortunately for detectives, shortly after Reggie underwent surgery, they received word that his condition has stabilized. He's conscious, but in a lot of pain.
And obviously, there's a knife wound in the side, and they did note a small cut in his colon, which they repaired, and they repaired some damage to a few other organs.
Later that morning, Reggie's finally strong enough to share his story with police.
Reggie, I'm the detective investigating your case. Could you tell us what happened to you while you ended up here in the hospital?
Okay. Well, we were at my cousin's party, and things were just fine. What's up, cuz? How you doing? I'm good.
Reggie says that he and Crystal were both drinking that evening. But as the night progressed, he began to wonder if Crystal was having too much fun.
He felt that Crystal was being a little flirtatious and rather disrespectful to him.
By 2 a.m., when they arrived back at their apartment complex, tensions were running high. That's when they ran into Durham police officer Christopher King. It's then that Reggie drops a bombshell. He tells police that in the weeks leading up to the party, he'd heard rumors Crystal had been cheating on him.
He had been hearing from neighbors about Crystal sneaking men in the house during the day when he was at work.
Reggie says seeing Crystal flirting with another man on the heels of his family get-together was more than he could bear.
He felt, well, I've opened up my home to Crystal and her 3 children, welcomed them in, taking care of them, and this is how she repays me.
You are so crazy and insecure.
I'm crazy?
Yes.
I'm crazy? Every time I turn around, you're talking to some strange dude.
Hey, you ought to go to tone it down, and you got to take it inside.
The police officer asked the two of them to take their problems into the home. Shortly after they got into the home, a fight ensued.
Reggie claims that inside their apartment, he told Crystal she needed to move out immediately.
You know what?
What?
You can get out right now. Right now.
He says she ignored him and locked herself in the bathroom.
She got her phone and she tried to call somebody to come pick her up so she could leave the apartment. He wasn't having it.
Reggie acknowledges he was enraged and might have taken things a little too far.
Hey, I need for you to come pick me up. Reggie is going crazy. Just come on, hurry up, please.
All right, you talking to somebody on the phone?
Reggie admits to breaking the door down.
He grabbed her by the hair and was trying to pull her out.
Come on.
To detectives, it sounds like Reggie was the aggressor in the apartment. And if Crystal is indeed the one who stabbed him, she's got a pretty clear-cut case of self-defense. But Reggie claims that once they were outside the bathroom, he let Crystal go. At that point, it was Crystal who then became the aggressor.
He gave them a clear-cut description that Crystal was the one that was trying to kill him. They went into a rage of violence, and the next thing you know, he was defending himself because she became enraged.
She goes into my uncle's kitchen. She picked up that knife.
Don't ever touch me again. Don't put your hands on me.
What?
Don't put your hands on me. What's she gonna do?
He said he was going to leave, but she stabbed him before he could.
They said, she just stabbed me. She just got crazy. She stabbed me.
Given the location of Reggie's wound, his story of the attack makes sense and calls into question the notion of self-defense, as does Crystal's lack of bruising or other injuries indicative of an attack against her.
She had no bruises to say that Reggie was beating her. All Reginald wounds looked defensive. That's he was trying to flee, get away. You know, they was in his back, on his side.
Still, police need more evidence before they can move forward with assault charges against Crystal.
She was being detained, which is a normal procedure in the law enforcement arena, so that the crime scene investigators could go back to the crime scene, get whatever kind of evidence they need.
Specifically, investigators are focusing on the slew of knives found scattered around the apartment. Police can only reach one conclusion. Crystal must have placed them there before fleeing the scene.
There was knives in areas that really did not seem that you should have a knife. It appeared that the crime scene may have been tampered with.
When coupled with Crystal's apparent lack of injuries, the fact that the crime scene had been tampered with gave investigators the ammunition they needed to throw the book at Crystal Mangum.
She was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, intent to kill, inflicting serious injury.
While news of Crystal's arrest is met with relief from Reggie's family, her friends can't believe the turn of events.
I was crushed. I just couldn't believe it. I was mortified.
But before Crystal can get her day in court, this case would take yet another dark and sensational turn. One that would not only leave a community grasping for answers, but would also thrust Crystal Mangum back onto Durham's center stage once again. Less than 48 hours after the near-fatal stabbing of Durham resident Reggie Day, police have arrested his 32-year-old girlfriend, Crystal Mangum. While Reggie admits losing his temper with Crystal, the location of his knife wound, coupled with a doctored crime scene and Crystal's apparent lack of injuries, has prompted prosecutors to charge Crystal with assault with intent to kill.
He said he was going to leave, but she stabbed him before he could.
After emergency surgery, Reggie appears to be on the mend. So it comes as a shock when just a few short days after Crystal's arrest, Reggie's condition takes a turn for the worse.
He was in a coma, and unfortunately, his family had to make the difficult decision to take him off of life support.
After being taken off life support, Reggie passes away.
I said, what? I said, I just talked to him yesterday.
And I was like, nah, man, I got to see my uncle again. I can't see, I'm not gonna have the last memory of him bending over, gasping for air in my head.
Reggie's passing also means prosecutors will up the charges against Crystal Mangum.
The medical examiner stated that he died due to complications due to a stab wound. And because of that, Crystal Mangum was charged with Reginald Day's murder.
The charges carry a maximum sentence of life in prison. But some in the community can't help but wonder if Crystal is being prosecuted less for the attack on Reggie Day and more as punishment for her past transgressions.
That she wears the scarlet letter. You know, everything she does has been put under a microscope. You can't have a relationship with somebody, and if you do, if they decide to abuse you, you must let them abuse you because you are Crystal Mangum. That's what has been put upon her, and that's not fair to her.
And it's under that cloud of angst and suspicion that Crystal's trial finally begins on November 14th, 2013. Once again, the Durham community finds itself divided.
You had Reginald's family sat in on one side. You had some of Crystal's supporters sitting on the other, and a whole bank of reporters in the back.
In opening arguments, prosecutors assert that on April 3rd, 2011, Crystal and Reggie engaged in a heated argument inside their apartment. And when Reggie tried to defuse the situation by leaving the scene, Crystal lashed out in violence.
They were fussing about her dating other men. She went to the kitchen, got a knife, and stabbed him.
To support their claim, prosecutors highlight Reggie's hospital statement, along with the lack of visible injuries to Crystal Mangum's body.
She had no wounds on her where she had been hit. It don't take a rocket scientist to see what happened. She got into an aggressive state, didn't like something that went on, and stabbed Reginald.
While prosecutors only briefly reference the Duke Lacrosse scandal, they do zero in on another dark secret of Crystal's, one that could bolster their theory that Crystal had a propensity for violence. Prosecutors call to the stand an ex-boyfriend named Milton Walker, who recounts a bizarre incident that took place less than a year before the attack on Reggie Day.
I saw you in this state. I saw you. Just jump you, bro. Just take your hands off me. Don't you ever put your hands on me again.
She put some of his clothes in the bathtub and set them on fire.
I'm not taking it anymore.
And was screaming that she was going to kill him. It indicated that she had a terrible temper and that she was willing to become physical during an altercation.
But as defense attorneys are quick to point out, in both that case and this one, Crystal had no choice but to meet force with force.
Well, I think that Crystal felt like at this point, you know, she needed to get on the stand and at least try to tell what happened because she was there. Only her and Reginald know.
Finally, after much anticipation, the woman at the center of this controversy takes the stand. Crystal recounts how their argument escalated in the early morning hours of April 3rd.
She said that when they got back in the house, he was screaming at her.
You were talking to that dude out there.
Hey,
I saw you
just
flirting
a
with
friend. I'm not flirting with anybody.
He said Mr. Day punched her repeatedly, knocked her down.
Crystal says she fled to the bathroom, but Reggie kicked in the door and dragged her out by her hair. Retreating to their back bedroom, Crystal says she was stunned by what happened next.
according to Crystal. He went to the kitchen and got knives.
I got something for you.
Started throwing them at her, and she was hiding behind the mattress, which was flipped up.
Oh, so you want to talk to another man?
She said that at that point, when he grabbed her again and he was on her, he was on top of her, trying to choke her.
She reached around on the floor, found one, and reached up and stabbed him.
For those hearing Crystal's story for the first time, it's a convincing tale.
She did a good job on the stand. She's an intelligent woman. I think she presented her case.
But prosecutors fire back and say Crystal's story about Reggie throwing knives is all a figment of her imagination.
There were no knife marks in the mattress that she was supposedly hiding behind.
The prosecution's theory was that she had staged it and she placed the knives where they were just to make like it was more damage and harm done than actually was.
While the forensic evidence contradicts Crystal's version of events, her defense team reminds jurors that it was Reggie, not Crystal, who initiated their fatal encounter.
She tried to get away by going into a locked bathroom. Reggie kicked the door down, went in there, grabbed her by the hair, and drug her out. But at the end of the day, if someone kicks in a door to get at you and is dragging you by the hair, generally you would have a right to respond.
But as this case nears its conclusion, there is one more shocking allegation still to be made. And it might be the saving grace Durham's most controversial resident has been looking for all along. November 14th, 2013. More than 29 months after single mother Crystal Mangum stabbed her boyfriend Reginald Day during an argument, her first-degree murder trial has once again garnered the attention of the national media.
Everything Crystal touches seems to draw a spotlight. There were cameras everywhere.
Crystal's supporters believe the single mother of three is being unfairly prosecuted, in part due to her notoriety following the Duke lacrosse scandal.
Crystal could have jaywalked in Durham and it would be a major crime. That'll always haunt her.
But prosecutors have asserted the evidence in this case speaks for itself. That Crystal didn't stab Reggie in self-defense, and that her history of lies and violence proves she's quite capable of murder.
It sounds crazy that a premonition of something bad might happen to Reggie when he told me that he was dealing with this woman.
As this case wraps up, defense attorneys make a bold and unexpected move. They claim that Reggie didn't die from Crystal's stab wound.
The ME testified this was an uncomplicated knife wound that fully should have been survivable. He should have absolutely been fine, and the fact that he wasn't certainly is a problem.
The defense introduces Reggie's medical records, which revealed that due to complications resulting from alcohol withdrawal, doctors had to intubate Reggie in order to help him breathe, which the defense claims turned out to be a huge mistake.
That resulted into him having a heart attack.
Blood flow was cut off to his brain. He went into a coma, essentially brain dead.
The argument incenses Reggie's family and friends, who believe either way, Crystal is still responsible for his death.
The bottom line is, Reggie wouldn't have been in there if you wouldn't have stabbed him. You know what I'm saying? And you're to blame, you're the cause for him dying. And that's the bottom line.
But when the jury retires for deliberation on November 21st, 2013, Crystal's defense team is hoping for an acquittal. But they worry that the jury is biased against her.
When they're out, you're hoping that they're listening to all the evidence, that they're not considering that this is the Crystal Mangum.
After 6 hours of deliberations, the jury returns with their verdict. They start with the first-degree murder charge.
They said not guilty. I said, okay, we just about got this.
But then the clerk reads the verdict on the second-degree murder charge.
They said she was guilty of second-degree murder. She put her head back and started crying.
That same afternoon, the judge hands down his sentence.
He sentenced her to 14 years and 2 months to 18 years in prison, and it doesn't seem like a lot unless you're the person who has to serve.
When that judge handed down that sentence,
I couldn't even sit in the courtroom any longer. It was all over for me.
For Reggie's loved ones, the verdict brings a sense of both sadness and relief.
It was like a double-edged sword. I'm winning and I'm losing at the same time. It hurts. It hurts.
I wish that she would have gotten more time than what she got. It took somebody that really meant something to a lot of people. I just miss him a lot.
But while the pain, controversy, and questions still linger, there's no denying that the unconditional love Reggie Day so desperately craved led him into the arms of the wrong woman. A woman who seemed to leave a wake of violence and suspicion following behind her everywhere she went.
Reginald needed to be needed, and Crystal utilized that. He may not have realized how much she craved things and that he may not have had enough to give her to satisfy those hunger cravings inside of her.
Setting up the festival barriers. I have 50 witnesses who can place me at the Esplanade since noon. Jimmy knew, with a sinking feeling in his gut, that Duncan was telling the truth. The shock was too raw. Duncan was a sleazy businessman and an adulterer, but he wasn't a cold-blooded killer running through peat bogs with a hunting knife. Who beat up Ronald? Jimmy demanded. Duncan swallowed hard. I did. He came at me at the docks. He was drunk, swinging wildly. He knew about Anna. I hit him with a pipe I found on the ground to defend myself. I left him there. I'm sorry, Jimmy. I'm so sorry. Jimmy lowered his flashlight. The pieces didn't fit. If Duncan didn't kill Mima, and he didn't kill Hattie, then who did? Suddenly, from outside, the night was shattered by a massive, booming explosion of sound. The crowd at the park had thrown their torches into the galley. Through the grimy skylights of the fish market, the sky turned a brilliant, violent orange. The fire had begun. And in that flash of blinding light, Jimmy's mind finally connected the disjointed fragments of the puzzle. Mima Wilson, the skull of Pearl Lundstedt, the missing journal detailing a traitor, Hattie James murdered with a knife to keep her quiet. It wasn't about the land. It wasn't about the affair. Those were just convenient distractions. It was about the past. Oh, God, Jimmy whispered, the blood running cold in his veins. Sir, Tosh asked, alarmed by the look on his face. The traitor, Jimmy said, his voice barely audible over the roaring fire outside. The one who sold out the Shetland bus. Pearl Lundstedt found out who it was, and he wrote it in his journal. And Mima knew, Tosh realized, she kept the secret to protect someone. Not someone, Jimmy corrected, turning to run back toward the door. Family. But Andrew Holdan is in a wheelchair, Tosh argued, chasing after him. He couldn't have killed them. No, Jimmy shouted, bursting out into the alleyway, sprinting toward his car. But his grandson could. A grandson who would do anything to protect his family's name and their fortune. A grandson who was a police officer who had access to the crime scene, who knew exactly how to contaminate evidence, and who had a shotgun license. Tosh stopped dead in her tracks. Sandy. Chapter 17, The Sins of the Fathers. The drive to the Wilson house in Lerwick was a blur of adrenaline and dread, Jimmy pushed the engine of his Ford Focus to the limit, weaving dangerously through the festival traffic. Sandy Wilson, the quiet, eager-to-please detective constable, the boy who had thrown up outside his grandmother's croft. It had been a perfect performance. I told my dad not to come down. I was worried about contamination. Sandy had been alone at the croft for over an hour before Jimmy arrived. He hadn't just discovered the body, he had orchestrated the scene. I used a pen to push the jack. She didn't have anything to steal. He had unplugged the phone so Mima couldn't call for help as she lay dying. And Hattie, Sandy had been off duty today. He had known about the dig, known about the documents Hattie found. He had gone up there, taken Berglund's knife from the empty tent, and hunted her down in the bog to retrieve the journal that named his great-grandfather as a Nazi collaborator. Jimmy slammed the brakes, skidding to a halt outside Joseph Wilson's neat, terraced house. The front door was ajar. Jimmy drew his baton, signaling for Tosh to take the back. He moved silently up the path, stepping through the open door into the hallway. The house was dark, but a faint light spilled from the living room. Jimmy edged closer. He heard the sound of sobbing. He stepped into the doorway, his baton raised. Joseph Wilson was sitting on the sofa, his head in his hands, crying silently. On the coffee table in front of him lay a heavy, leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle. Per Lundstedt's journal. Standing by the window, looking out at the distant glow of the Uphelly AA fire, was Sandy. He was holding his service radio in one hand and a heavy iron poker from the fireplace in the other. He turned as Jimmy entered. His young face was unrecognizable, twisted by grief, desperation, and a terrifying, cold resolve. Sandy, Jimmy said, his voice surprisingly calm, put it down. You figured it out, then, sir? Sandy asked, his voice cracking. He sounded like a frightened child. I knew you would. You're too smart. I know about the journal. Sandy, I know what Andrew Holdan did during the war. Joseph let out a broken wail from the sofa. He sold them out. Jimmy, my grandfather, he sold out the Norwegian boys for German gold to build his fishing fleet. Mima knew. She caught him burying the body. She kept quiet to protect the family name, to protect me. And when the dig started, Sandy continued, his knuckles white around the iron poker, she panicked. She told me she was going to confess. She was going to ruin everything. The whole Dan Empire. Our name. Everyone would know we were the descendants of a traitor. So you shot your own grandmother? Jimmy asked, repulsed. I had to. Sandy screamed, tears streaming down his face. I had to protect us. She was old. She had lived her life. But if that journal got out, the Haldanes would lose everything. They'd take the boats, the money, the respect. And Hattie? Sandy shuddered, closing his eyes. She saw the journal in the tent. She read the names. I didn't want to hurt her, Inspector, I swear. But she ran. I chased her. And I had the knife. I just couldn't let her tell. It's over, Sandy, Jimmy said softly, taking a step forward. You're a police officer. You know how this ends. Put the poker down. Sandy looked at the iron bar in his hand, then out the window at the roaring fire illuminating the Shetland sky. The Viking galley was burning to ash, taking its secrets with it. I wanted to be a good detective, sir, Sandy whispered, a sad, broken smile touching his lips. I really did. He raised the iron poker, not at Jimmy, but swinging it wildly toward his own head. No. Jimmy lunged forward, tackling the young officer to the floor. The poker crashed into the coffee table, splintering the wood. They wrestled on the carpet, Sandy fighting with the manic strength of a doomed man, but Jimmy was older, heavier, and fueled by righteous anger. He pinned Sandy down, wrenching his arms behind his back and snapping the handcuffs shut with a brutal click. Sandy collapsed against the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Joseph Wilson sat on the sofa, frozen in horror, watching his son a murderer twice over being read his rights. Tosh burst through the back door, breathing heavily, assessing the scene in a split second. Call for a transport, Jimmy ordered, hauling Sandy to his feet. He looked at the young man, feeling no triumph, only a profound, crushing sorrow for the island that had bred such dark loyalty. Yes, sir, Tosh said quietly, reaching for her radio. As they walked Sandy out of the house and into the freezing Shetland night, the wind howled off the North Sea, carrying the scent of salt, ancient ice, and the bitter ashes of the burning galley. The secrets of Bressay had finally been unearthed, but the scars they left behind would take generations to heal. End of part 2. The Architecture of Masks. Prologue. The Cost of a Coat. The human face is the most elaborate lie ever constructed. We spend our lives curated by expectations, dressing ourselves in the fabrics of our professions, our marriages, and our social standing. But for some, the mask isn't a social necessity, it is the entire self. In the late afternoon light of Orange County, 1979, the sun didn't just shine, it glared. It bounced off the chrome of luxury cars and the glass of medical plazas, promising a version of the American dream that was as sterile as a surgical suite. Inside one of these suites, a man adjusted his stethoscope. He looked like a doctor. He spoke like a doctor. He even smelled of antiseptic and authority. But Gerald Barnbound knew that if you peel back enough layers of a mask, eventually you find nothing but the cold, hard vacuum of a man who never existed. Chapter 1. The Clinic of Silence. Rick D'Alessandro was a man who believed in the tangible. He believed in blood pressure readings, the steady rhythm of a healthy heart, and the clear, unambiguous data of a lab report. As a physician's assistant, his job was to be the bridge between the patient's suffering and the doctor's wisdom. In 1979, that wisdom supposedly resided in Dr. Gerald Barnes. He was a charming man, Rick would later recall, his voice carrying the weight of a decade's worth of hindsight. A little guy, but he filled a room. He had that bedside manner they don't teach in school, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. The clinic in Orange County was a hive of activity. Dr. Barnes was the director, a position of prestige that he occupied with a natural, almost theatrical grace. He was the doctor's doctor, the man who stayed late, the man who remembered the names of his patients' children. But Rick noticed small things, a hesitation when discussing complex pharmacology, a certain vagueness when the conversation drifted toward the minutiae of medical school rotations. At the time, Rick dismissed it. He's a busy man, he told himself. The administrative burden of being a director is heavy. Then came the morning of December 26th, the day after Christmas. The world was nursing a collective hangover of celebration, and the clinic was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional cough from the waiting room. John Mackenzie walked in, or rather, he shuffled. He was 29 years old, a man in the prime of his life, but he looked like a ghost. His skin was the color of old parchment, and his eyes were sunken, darting around with a frantic, unfocused energy. I'm so thirsty, Rick, John whispered. His voice was raspy, as if his throat were lined with sand. I drink, and it just goes through me. I'm dizzy. The room won't stay still. Rick performed the intake. Extreme weight loss, polyuria, polydipsia, the classic triad. To a trained eye, the red flags were waving violently. He ushered John into the exam room where Dr. Barnes waited. Dizziness, A. The doctor said, his voice a soothing baritone. He patted John on the shoulder. Probably just a touch of vertigo, a little inner ear imbalance. It's been a stressful season. John, we'll get you fixed up. Rick watched as Barnes scribbled a prescription for an anti-vertigo medication. No immediate finger stick for blood sugar. No urgent hospitalization. Just a slip of paper and a see you next week. Doctor, shouldn't we? Rick started. We've ordered the blood tests, Rick. Barnes interrupted, flashing a bright, practiced smile. The lab will have them by tomorrow. Let the man go home and rest. It's the holidays. John Mackenzie left the clinic clutching a prescription that was effectively a death warrant. He walked out into the California sun, his body screaming for insulin, his blood turning into a thick, syrupy poison. Chapter 2. The Weight of 1,200. The next day, the clinic felt different. The air was heavy. Dr. Barnes had the day off a reward for his hard work during the holiday rush. The lab results arrived in a manila envelope. Rick opened it, his heart skipping a beat as he scanned the numbers. He looked for the glucose line. He expected to see a high number, perhaps 200 or 300. The number on the page was 1,200. In the medical world, a blood sugar of 1,200 isn't just a high reading. It is an emergency of the highest order. It is the threshold of a diabetic coma. It is the body's internal systems failing in real time. My God, Rick whispered. He didn't wait. He didn't call the director. He grabbed the phone and started dialing. He called John's home, no answer. He called John's ex-wife. His emergency contacts, nothing. A cold dread began to pool in Rick's stomach. I need a wellness check for John Mackenzie, Rick told the dispatcher at the Garden Grove Police Department. This is a medical emergency. He could be dead or dying. The police arrived at John's apartment an hour later. The silence behind the door was absolute. When they kicked it in, they found him in the kitchen. He was lying on the linoleum, his hand outstretched toward a glass of water he never reached. In his other hand was the prescription for the vertigo pills, the useless scraps of paper given to him by a man of science. John Mackenzie was dead. He was 29 years old. He left behind a 4-year-old daughter named Jill, who would spend the rest of her life wondering why her father never came home from the doctor. Chapter 3, The Actors Resume. Grief is a powerful catalyst. For Rick D'Alessandro, the grief for John Mackenzie quickly curdled into a sharp, piercing suspicion. How could a medical director miss a 1,200 blood sugar? How could a man with a medical degree treat a dying diabetic with vertigo pills? Rick sat in his office, the clinic now feeling like a house of mirrors. He picked up the phone and called the medical board in Sacramento. I'd like to verify the credentials of Dr. Gerald Barnes, he said. One moment, the clerk replied. We have a Gerald Barnes, orthopedic surgeon, practicing in Stockton. Stockton, Rick frowned. That's 400 miles away. This Dr. Barnes is a GP in Orange County. Would you like us to fax his identification photo? When the fax machine began to work and spit out the grainy image, Rick felt the world tilt. The man in the photo was older, with different features, a different jawline. It was a face he had never seen in his life. The man he had been working for, the man who had just treated John Mackenzie, was not Gerald Barnes. The investigation that followed unraveled a lie of staggering proportions. The man at the clinic was actually Gerald Barnbaum, a former pharmacist from Chicago. Barnbaum wasn't a doctor. He was a failed actor and a convicted fraudster who had been caught in a Medicaid scam years earlier. When his pharmacy license was revoked, Barnbaum didn't reflect or repent. He simply decided to play a bigger role. He moved to California, changed a few letters of his name, and borrowed the identity of a real doctor. He had called the medical board, claimed he lost his license, and they, without a single background check, sent him a duplicate. He had spent years seeing 30 to 40 patients a day. He had diagnosed illnesses, performed exams, and prescribed narcotics. He had lived a life of prestige, earning a high salary and the respect of his community, all while operating on the medical knowledge of a high school student and a few years of pharmacy school. He was an actor, investigator Eddie Banks would later say, and the clinic was his stage. Every patient was an audience member, and his performance was so good that even the experts didn't look behind the curtain. On August 8, 1980, the curtain finally fell. Gerald Barnbaum was arrested. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a likable little guy who had made a mistake. But the state of California didn't see a mistake. They saw manslaughter. Chapter 4, The Interstate Shadow. While Gerald Barnbaum was beginning his first prison stint several states away, another man was discovering the thrill of the mask. David Brankel did not look like a bank robber. He was impeccably dressed, often in custom-tailored suits that suggested a man of significant means. He was an entrepreneur, a consultant, a visionary. In the small, close-knit town of Bloomington, Indiana, he was the kind of man people wanted to be around. Phil Sperry, a local businessman, was one of them. He was smooth, Phil remembered. He had an answer for everything. He rented an office from us, claimed he was starting an architectural and construction firm called ACR. He talked about big projects, city planning, the future. But David Brankel's future wasn't built on blueprints and bricks. It was built on the interstate. Brankel lived a life of compartmentalized geography. In one town, he was the devoted father and husband. In another, he was the dashing boyfriend to a waitress named Donna. And on the highways that connected them, he was the interstate bankmart bandit. His method was a masterpiece of efficiency. He didn't hit the massive, high-security banks in city centers. He targeted the small branches inside grocery stores and bankmarts. They were usually staffed by younger, less experienced tellers. They were located near major highway on-ramps. He would walk in, often wearing a fishing hat or a simple pair of tan coveralls. He didn't shout. He didn't wave a gun. He would slide a note across the counter. I have a gun. Be quiet. Go home alive. He would be in and out in less than 90 seconds. By the time the police were dispatched, Brankel would be back on the I-65 or the I-70, his black BMW cruising at the speed limit, the stolen cash tucked away in a designer briefcase. I think the guy I'm looking for is doing the exact same thing I'm doing. Detective Larry Duncan would later muse. Duncan was the man tasked with catching him. I was sitting at my computer, looking at maps of grocery stores near interstates, and on the other side of the screen, in some hotel room or rented office, David Brankel was doing the same thing. It was a game of digital chess played across state lines. Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, Tennessee. Brankel was a ghost who left no fingerprints and no trail except for the pattern of his robberies. Chapter 5, The Two-Way Mirror. By the mid-90s, Gerald Barnbaum was out of prison. He had served his time for the death of John Mackenzie, but the prison walls hadn't changed him. They had only refined his craft. While incarcerated, he had taken medical correspondence courses. He had studied the language of healing so he could more effectively poison the truth. He stepped out of the prison gates and immediately stepped back into a lab coat. This time, he found Lisa Roberts. He was the perfect husband, Lisa said, her voice trembling with the ghost of a memory. Flowers, dinners, concerts. He swept me off my feet. He was Dr. Gerald Barnes, the medical director of a high-end clinic in Los Angeles. He made 6 figures. We were going to have children. We were going to build a life. For over a year, Lisa shared a bed with a man whose name she didn't know. She watched him leave for work every morning, his stethoscope draped around his neck like a badge of honor. She attended company functions where other doctors sought his advice. Even the FBI used his clinic for their agent physicals. Think of the irony. 100 FBI agents, trained to spot deception, stripped down to their underwear and let an imposter listen to their hearts. The mask was perfect until the Christmas party of 1996. Rick D'Alessandro was there. Fate, it seems, has a sense of dark humor. Rick was attending the same industry event. He was checking in at the desk when he saw a man across the room, a likable little guy with a familiar smile. Rick looked at the man's lapel. The name tag read, "Hi, I'm Dr. Barnes." The blood drained from Rick's face. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. He walked over. The music was playing something festive and bright. The air smelled of expensive cologne and champagne. "Hi, Rick," the imposter said, not missing a beat. His voice was as cool as the ice in his drink. "How are you doing?" "Well, Gerald," Rick replied, his voice shaking with fury. "I'm not doing too well, because you're doing the same thing you did in the 70s. You're a fraud." Barnbaum didn't panic. He didn't run. He leaned in, his eyes soft and pleading. "Rick, you don't understand. This is all just a big mistake. I can go home and get the paperwork. I can prove everything." "Then go get it," the clinic supervisor said, having overheard the exchange. Barnbaum walked out the door. He didn't go home for paperwork. He went into the night, disappearing into the neon labyrinth of Los Angeles. But the FBI was no longer his patient. They were his hunters. Chapter 6, The Art of the Escape. David Brankel was also beginning to feel the heat. It was 2003, and the IBM Task Force, a coalition of detectives from multiple states, was closing in. They had a nickname for him now, IBM. They had a photo of his car, a black BMW. They had a theory about his home base in Indiana. They even had a name for their trap, Operation Intercept. On September 6, 2003, Brankel hit his 35th bank. He walked into a U.S. bank in Louisville, slid his note, and took the cash. The police radio crackled to life. Operation Intercept. Operation Intercept. Detectives flooded the highways. They pulled over every black BMW they saw. They searched trunks, checked IDs, and waited for the bandit to fall into their lap. But David Brankel was smarter than the average thief. He didn't take the interstate. He knew the police would be watching the veins of the city, so he took the back roads, the winding rural paths where the only witnesses were the cornfields and the crows. He slipped through the news, listening to the police scanner in his car, a smug smile on his face. He was listening to us, Detective Duncan said. He was one step ahead because he had no conscience to slow him down. Brankel returned to his safe zone. In Vincennes, he was a consultant for the Logan family, who were building a pet store empire. He sat at their dinner table, played with their children, and took their money for consultation fees. He was God's gift to us, Becky Logan said, or so we thought. At the same time, Brankel was maintaining his relationship with Donna. She was now his getaway driver. They were the modern Bonnie and Clyde, fueled by a mixture of narcissism and high-octane gasoline. My mother said I couldn't even mow the lawn right. Brankel told Donna during one of their long drives. But look at me now. I'm the most successful bank robber in history. He wasn't robbing for the money anymore. He was robbing to prove that the mask was realer than the man. Chapter 7, The Collapse. The end of a lie is rarely a grand explosion. It is usually a series of small, pathetic cracks. For Gerald Barnbaum, the crack was a bus ticket. After being caught again in 1996, he had been sentenced to 12.5 years. But in 2000, while being transferred between facilities, the system made a fatal error. Because he was a low-security inmate, a nonviolent fraudster in their eyes, they gave him a bus ticket and told him to report to a prison in Illinois. He didn't go to Illinois. He went back to the only life he knew. He ended up in a North Hollywood clinic, wearing a white coat and a stethoscope, seeing patients under the name Gerald Barnes. When U.S. Marshals finally tracked him down, they walked into the clinic and called out his real name, Gerald Barnbaum. The man in the white coat turned around. He didn't fight. He didn't try to explain. He just looked at the handcuffs and sighed. "You guys are good," he said. For David Brankel, the end came on a cold December day in 2003. He was driving his BMW in Bloomington when he nearly hit a car driven by an off-duty detective named Kevin Hill. It was a routine traffic stop that turned into a 100-mile-an-hour chase. Brankel disregarded stop signs, drove into oncoming traffic, and eventually left the police in the dust. But he had dropped his driver's license. The police went to his home in Vincennes. They found him trying to flee with his son in the car. He abandoned the vehicle and ran on foot, a small knife in his pocket, tripping over a curb in a maze of apartment buildings. When the handcuffs clicked shut, the entrepreneur was gone. The consultant was gone. All that was left was a tired, 46-year-old man who had robbed 43 banks and had nothing to show for it but a suitcase full of disguises. Epilogue: the empty room. In the end, what remains of a man who spent his life being someone else? Gerald Barnbaum is in a federal prison in Minnesota. He is in his 70s now. The real Dr. Gerald Barnes, the orthopedic surgeon from Stockton, still deals with the wreckage of his stolen identity. It's a headache that never goes away, he says. David Brankel is serving 21 years. The Logans and the Sperrys never got their money back. Donna, the Bonnie to his Clyde, received house arrest. The victims aren't just the people who lost money or the families who lost loved ones like John Mackenzie. The victims are the very concepts of trust and truth. We look at the man in the white coat. We look at the businessman in the suit. We want to believe that the clothes make the man. But as Rick D'Alessandro learned in a quiet clinic in 1979, sometimes the clothes are just a costume, and the man underneath is just a ghost, searching for a face that was never his to begin with. Shadows of the Stolen Soul. The Architecture of Deceit. Prologue: The Mirror's Lie. In the quiet, suburban sprawl of late 70s California, identity was a currency that few thought to verify. People were who they said they were. A handshake was a contract, and a white lab coat was an altar. Gerald Barnbaum understood this better than anyone. He didn't just want to be a doctor, he wanted the reverence of being one. He wanted the hush that fell over a room when he entered, the way people leaned in to hear his pronouncements, and the steady, unquestioned flow of authority. He was an actor who had found his ultimate stage, and the patients were an audience who paid with their lives. Miles away, and years later, David Brankel would find a different stage. His was the concrete ribbons of the American interstate system, the fluorescent-lit aisles of grocery store banks, and the desperate adrenaline of a man who believed his own lies. This is the story of two men who refused to be themselves, and the trail of broken lives they left in their wake. Part 1: The Cost of a Coat. Chapter 1: The Performance Begins. The Pacific Southwest Medical Group in Orange County smelled of antiseptic and misplaced trust. It was 1978, and the sun baked the asphalt outside. But inside, the air-conditioned cool offered a sanctuary for the sick. Rick D'Alessandro, a young and earnest physician's assistant, looked up as Dr. Gerald Barnes entered the clinic. Barnes was a likable little guy, as Rick would later recall. He had a quick wit, a disarming smile, and an energy that seemed to say, "I have everything under control." "Good morning, Rick," the doctor chirped, snapping a chart into his clipboard. Another day, another miracle to perform. Rick smiled back, unaware that he was watching a master class in theater. Gerald Barnbaum, the man inside the coat, was a pharmacist from Chicago who had lost his license in a Medicaid scam. But here, under the golden California sun, he was reborn. He had called the medical board, claimed to be a certain Dr. Gerald Barnes from Stockton, and requested a duplicate license. They had sent it without a second thought. For years, Barnbaum played the part. He saw 30, sometimes 40 patients a day. He diagnosed, he prescribed, he consoled. He was elevated to medical director. He was a pillar of the community. But beneath the stethoscope, there was a hollow space where medical knowledge should have been. He wasn't practicing medicine, he was mimicking it. Chapter 2, The Diabetic Ghost. December 26, 1979, the day after Christmas. The world was in a sugar-coated haze, but John Mackenzie felt like he was burning from the inside out. He was 29 years old, a father to a 4-year-old girl named Jill, and he was dying. He walked into the clinic with a thirst that no amount of water could quench, his eyes sunken, his breath smelling faintly of fermented fruit. I'm so tired, Doc," Mackenzie whispered, leaning against the examination table. "Dizzy. My mouth is like a dessert." Barnbaum, the man Mackenzie knew as Dr. Barnes, looked at him with professional concern. He didn't see a patient in an acute ketoacidotic crisis. He saw a nuisance on a busy morning. He performed a cursory exam, noted the dizziness, and reached for his prescription pad. "Antivert," Barnbaum said, scribbling the name of an anti-vertigo drug. "It's probably just a viral inner ear thing. Get some rest, John. We'll run some blood work just to be safe." John Mackenzie left the clinic clutching a piece of paper that might as well have been a death warrant. The next day, the lab results arrived. Rick D'Alessandro was the first to see them. He stared at the numbers, his heart hammering against his ribs. Blood glucose, 1,200 milligrams DL. A normal level was 100. At 1,200, the blood becomes thick, acidic, and toxic. It is a medical emergency of the highest order. "Where's Barnes?" Rick shouted, looking around the clinic. "He's got the day off," a nurse replied. Rick didn't wait. He grabbed the phone, calling Mackenzie's home, his ex-wife, anyone. Silence. Finally, he called the Garden Grove police. When the officers kicked in the door of Mackenzie's apartment, they found him on the kitchen floor. He was cold. In his hand, he still held the prescription for dizziness. He had died in a coma, a victim of a common, treatable disease and an uncommon, lethal fraud. Chapter 3, The Unmasking. The death of a 29-year-old was a tragedy. The negligence behind it was a crime. Rick D'Alessandro couldn't let it go. How could a doctor, a medical director, miss a blood sugar of 1,200? He called the medical board in Sacramento. "I need the file on Dr. Gerald Barnes," he said. the one working in Orange County. A few hours later, the fax machine groaned to life. Rick watched as the grainy image of the real Dr. Gerald Barnes emerged. It was a man from Stockton, an older man, an orthopedic surgeon, a man who looked nothing like the likable little guy in the office next door. The realization hit Rick like a physical blow. He wasn't working for a bad doctor. He was working for a ghost. On August 8, 1980, the charade ended. The police arrived not for a consultation, but for an arrest. Gerald Barnbaum was charged with practicing medicine without a license and, more significantly, manslaughter. It was a Medicaid scam in Chicago that started it, investigator Eddie Banks noted as they dug into the past. Barnbaum was a failed pharmacist and a frustrated actor. He had combined his two greatest failures to create a deadly success. In 1981, Barnbaum pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 3 years. To the family of John Mackenzie, it felt like an insult. Their father was gone, replaced by a 3-year vacation for the man who killed him. But for Barnbaum, prison was just an intermission. Chapter 4, The Relapse of Identity. Identity theft is an addiction. Some people crave drugs. Gerald Barnbaum craved the title of doctor. Released after 18 months, he didn't go back to pharmacy or theater. He went back to the lab coat. He changed cities, moved to Los Angeles, and applied for jobs using the same stolen credentials. In 1996, he was living a dream. He was married to a woman named Lisa Roberts. He was a 6-figure medical director. He was romantic, charming, and supposedly brilliant. I didn't know his real name. Lisa would later sob to investigators. I didn't know his real age. The man I shared my bed with was a stranger. The end came at an industry Christmas party. In a scene straight out of a thriller, Barnbaum bumped into an old acquaintance, Rick D'Alessandro. Rick looked at the man's lapel. "Hi, I'm Dr. Barnes." "Hello, Gerald," Rick said, his voice cold as ice. "I see you're still doing the same thing you did in the 70s. Barnbaum didn't blink. "Rick, good to see you. You must be mistaken. This is all a big misunderstanding." He promised to go home and get his documentation. Instead, he vanished, but the FBI was already closing in. Special Agent Marie Kinjofsky discovered that Barnbaum had even performed physicals for over 100 FBI agents. The irony was suffocating. This time, the judge was done. Barnbaum was sentenced to 12.5 years. Even then, he wasn't finished. During a low-security transfer in 2000, he was given a bus ticket to report to a new facility. He never got on the bus. Instead, he went to North Hollywood, put on a white coat, and started seeing patients again. When the U.S. Marshals finally cornered him in a clinic, he was wearing a stethoscope. He looked at them and simply said, "You guys are good." Gerald Barnbaum, the man who couldn't stop being someone else, was finally sent away for good, leaving behind a legacy of $5 million in fraud and one empty chair at John Mackenzie's Thanksgiving table. Part 2, The Interstate Phantom. Chapter 5, The Smooth Operator. While Barnbaum was a parasite of the medical world, David Brankel was a predator of the interstates. He appeared in Bloomington, Indiana, in 1999 like a character out of a Gatsby novel. He was impeccably dressed, smooth-talking, and carried the aura of a man who moved millions. He rented an office from Phil and Bonnie Sperry, claiming his company, ACR, was a powerhouse in architecture and construction. He always had the right answer, Phil Sperry recalled. He was cool. He was smooth. Brankel was a master of the long con. He didn't just rob you. He made you feel privileged to be robbed. He convinced Bonnie Sperry to start an interior design firm called Trade Secrets. He used their name to open house accounts at high-end clothing stores, racking up $8,000 in suits because he believed a man's worth was measured in the thread count of his lapels. When the Sperrys finally caught on, Brankel didn't apologize. He packed his bags, took his wife and young son, and moved to Vincennes, Indiana. He had a Newmark, Alan and Becky Logan, owners of a local pet store. He sold them a dream of a family entertainment complex called Logan's Great Escape. He showed them brochures, timetables, and contracts for a company called Vanguard Capital Marketing Group. Maybe this was God's gift to us, Becky Logan thought at the time. It wasn't. It was a $3,500 retainer and a $500 a month drain on their hard-earned savings. Brankel would even bring his young son to collect the checks, using the child as a human shield of legitimacy. Chapter 6, The IBM Bandit. But the consulting fees weren't enough to fund Brankel's dual life. While he was a businessman in Vincennes from Sunday to Wednesday, he was someone else from Thursday to Saturday. He would drive to Bloomington to see a girlfriend named Donna Hewins, a waitress at a topless bar, and together they would go to work. Brankel's work was the interstate bank mart IBM robberies. He was a creature of habit and efficiency. He would use his computer to map out grocery store banks near interstate exits. He would walk in wearing a fishing hat or tan coveralls and hand a note to the teller. I have a gun. Be calm. Both drawers. Be quiet. Go home alive. He never showed a weapon. He never shouted. He was as professional in his robberies as he was in his scams. Detective Larry Duncan in Louisville was the first to see the pattern. He's doing the exact same thing I'm doing, Duncan realized, staring at a map of the highways. He's using the interstates as a getaway grid. Between 2002 and 2003, Brankel hit 43 banks in 6 states. He was a ghost on the asphalt, always slipping away before the sirens reached the parking lot. Chapter 7, Operation Intercept. The task force grew Duncan, Schley, and Freihofer, a trio of lawmen determined to catch the man they called IBM. They caught a break in Lexington, Kentucky. A surveillance camera caught a grainy image of a black BMW 7 Series. It was a luxury car, a businessman's car, and it had a driver, a blonde woman. Donna Hewins had become the Bonnie to his Clyde. Duncan devised Operation Intercept. He flooded the interstates with 1,200 officers. They waited. On September 6, 2003, Brankel hit a bank in Louisville. Operation Intercept. The radio screamed. But Brankel was listening. He had a scanner. He heard the panic in the police voices, the rush to the highways. He took the back roads. He slipped through the noose. "We've blown it," Duncan whispered into his radio as the sun set. "He's gone." Chapter 8, The Fall. Fate, however, has a way of punishing hubris. In December 2003, David Brankel was driving his black BMW through Bloomington. He was speeding, reckless, fueled by the invincibility of 43 successful heists. He nearly ran a car off the road. That car was driven by Detective Kevin Hill. When Hill pulled the BMW over, the driver's license didn't match the plates. The plates were stolen. "Show me your hands," Hill shouted, his gun drawn. Brankel looked at the officer. He didn't see a threat. He saw a nuisance. "We're okay," he said calmly, then slammed the car into drive. The chase reached 100 miles per hour. Brankel escaped again, but he left behind a fatal error: his real Indiana driver's license. The end came in Vincennes. The Indiana State Police surrounded his home. Brankel tried to flee on foot, abandoning his young son in the car. He tripped on a curb in an apartment complex, falling face first into the grass. As the handcuffs clicked shut, a small knife fell from his pocket. "I wasn't going to stab you," Brankel pleaded. "It just fell out." In the trunk of his BMW, they found the history of a career criminal, suitcases of disguises, a 9mm handgun, and notes on banks across the Midwest. Chapter 9, The Interrogation. For 6 hours, David Brankel talked. He told the investigators everything. He spoke about his first robbery, about Donna's involvement, about his mother's disapproval. He was a sociopath who blamed the world for his choices, yet he wanted the credit for his crimes. "Call the Louisville Metro," he told the officers with a twisted sense of pride. "They'll know who I am. I'm the IBM bandit." He was sentenced to 21 years. Donna Hewins received house arrest and probation. The $175,000 in restitution was ordered, but for the Sperrys and the Logans, the money was gone, dissolved into the gas and suits of a man who lived a life built on air. Epilogue: The Masquerade's End. Gerald Barnbaum and David Brankel were two sides of the same counterfeit coin. One stole a life to heal, the other stole a life to spend. Both were convinced that they were more than the men they were born to be. They looked in the mirror and saw a doctor, a developer, a master thief. But as the cell doors slammed shut, the costumes were stripped away. The lab coat was gone. The BMW was sold at auction. All that remained were the records of their crimes and the quiet, enduring pain of the people they had fooled. In the end, you can change your name, your job, and your car. You can map out every interstate and memorize every medical text. But you can never outrun the person you see when the lights go out. The masquerade was over. The shadows were finally forced into the light. The architecture of deception. A saga of masks, mirrors, and the men who lived within them. Prologue, the weight of a name. Names are supposed to be anchors. They are the first gifts we receive and the last things carved into stone when we depart. But for some, a name is merely a garment, a coat to be stolen, a hat to be exchanged, a mask to be worn until the elastic snaps. In the sun-drenched sprawl of Orange County, and the rain-slicked interstates of the Midwest, two men perfected the art of being someone else. One wore a white coat and carried a stethoscope like a scepter, ruling over life and death with the confidence of a god and the education of a ghost. The other wore dapper suits and a boonie hat, transforming from a visionary entrepreneur into a shadow that haunted bank marts. Fueled by a narcissism so profound he believed the world owed him its riches. This is not just a chronicle of crimes. It is an exploration of the hollow spaces inside the human soul where conscience should reside. Book 1, The White Coat. Chapter 1, The Bitter Thirst. The air in the Orange County Medical Facility smelled of antiseptic and old magazines. It was December 26, 1979, that strange, liminal time between Christmas and the New Year when the world feels sluggish and overfed. John Mackenzie felt anything but overfed. He felt like he was being consumed from the inside out. At 29, John should have been in the prime of his life. Instead, he leaned against the clinic's reception desk, his knuckles white. His skin was the color of parchment, stretched tight over a frame that had lost 20 pounds in a matter of weeks. His tongue felt like a piece of dry leather, and no matter how much water he drank, the fire in his throat wouldn't go out. "Dr. Barnes will see you now," the receptionist said, her voice bright and oblivious. John stumbled into the examination room. A few moments later, the man he knew as Dr. Gerald Barnes entered. He was a small man, likable in the way a veteran stage actor is likable. He had a quick smile, an easy manner, and a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. "Well, now, John," Barnes said, clicking his pen, "you're looking a bit peaked. Tell me what's going on." John rattled off the list of miseries, the dizziness that made the room tilt, the excessive thirst that woke him up 6 times a night, the constant need to urinate, the dry mouth that made it hard to swallow. Barnes didn't look worried. He didn't check for the fruity breath of ketoacidosis. He didn't immediately call for a finger prick glucose test. He simply nodded, scribbling on a pad with an elegant flourish. Vertigo, Barnes diagnosed with a confident tap of his fingers. A simple inner ear disturbance, probably a viral remnant from the holidays. I'm going to give you a prescription for an anti-vertigo medication. It'll settle that equilibrium right down. And the thirst, John whispered, his voice cracking. Stress, John, the holidays do it to the best of us. We'll run some routine blood work just to be thorough, but take these pills and go home. Get some rest. John Mackenzie left the clinic with a piece of paper that was effectively his death warrant. Chapter 2. The Awakening of Rick D'Alessandro. Rick D'Alessandro liked his boss. Everyone did. As a physician's assistant, Rick admired the way Dr. Barnes managed the clinic. He was charismatic, funny, and seemed to possess an intuitive, almost theatrical grasp of patient relations. But on the morning of December 27th, the theater turned into a tragedy. Barnes had the day off. The lab results from the previous day's patients arrived in a neat stack on Rick's desk. He began flipping through them, his eyes scanning the numbers with practiced ease until he reached the chart for Mackenzie. John. Rick stopped breathing. A normal blood sugar level sits between 80 and 100. John Mackenzie's results read 1,200. It wasn't just high. It was astronomical. It was the kind of number that meant the body was literally turning into acid. My God, Rick whispered, the blood draining from his face. He's in a coma, or he's dying. He grabbed the phone. He called John's house, no answer. He called the emergency contact, an ex-wife she hadn't seen him. He called every number in the file, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Garden Grove Police? Rick barked into the receiver minutes later. I need a welfare check. $12.80 for West Gardenia. Immediate entry. It's a medical emergency. He waited by the phone, pacing the small office. He looked at the signature on the lab request. Gerald Barnes, MD. An hour later, the call came back. The police had kicked in the door. They found John Mackenzie on the kitchen floor. He was cold. In his hand, clutched like a useless talisman, was the prescription for the anti-vertigo drug. John Mackenzie, 29 years old, was dead because a doctor had ignored the most basic symptoms of a common disease. Chapter 3. The Facts from Sacramento. Grief is often followed by a cold, sharp anger. For Rick D'Alessandro, that anger was directed at the incompetence he had witnessed. How could a man of Barnes's experience, a medical director, miss an acute diabetic crisis? He began to look at the man in the white coat through a different lens. He noticed the way Barnes avoided technical discussions about complex pathologies. He noticed the way he relied more on charm than on clinical data. Rick sat at his desk late one night and did something he should have done years ago. He called the medical board in Sacramento. "I need to verify the credentials of a Dr. Gerald Barnes," Rick said, "and I'd like a copy of his identification photo on file." The fax machine in the corner began to work and click. It spat out a page, the thermal paper curling as it hit the floor. Rick picked it up. The man in the photo was Dr. Gerald Barnes, but he wasn't the man in the clinic. The real Dr. Barnes was an older, distinguished-looking orthopedic surgeon whose home address was listed in Stockton 400 miles away. Rick looked at the man currently sitting in the office down the hall, laughing with a pharmaceutical rep. He wasn't a doctor. He was a ghost. He was a fraud. He was Gerald Barnbaum. Chapter 4, The Pharmacist Stage. Gerald Barnbaum had always been an actor. In college, he lived for the applause, the grace paint, and the ability to inhabit a life more interesting than his own. But the stage didn't pay the bills. He became a pharmacist in Chicago, a profession that gave him access to the tools of medicine without the years of grueling residency. But the hollow spot in his soul demanded more. He got caught in a Medicaid scam, lost his license, and realized that if he couldn't be a legitimate pharmacist, he would be a superior doctor. He moved to California, the land of reinvention. He called the medical board, posing as the real Dr. Barnes, claiming he had lost his license and was opening a new clinic. They sent him a duplicate without a second thought. For years, he played the role. He saw 30, 40 patients a day. He wore the stethoscope like a prop. He loved the power. He loved the way people looked at him with trust. He didn't care that he was guessing. He didn't care that he was dangerous. To Gerald Barnbaum, the clinic was just another theater, and the patients were his audience. Until John Mackenzie died. On August 8, 1980, the curtain fell. The police arrived not for a consultation, but for an arrest. The charge, murder. But in the legal system, masks have a way of staying on. Barnbaum pled down to involuntary manslaughter and practicing medicine without a license. He was sentenced to 3 years. He served 18 months. When he walked out of those prison gates, he didn't look for a job at a grocery store or a warehouse. He looked for a new lab coat, because Gerald Barnbaum knew something the world didn't. If you act like a doctor, people will treat you like a doctor. And the real Dr. Gerald Barnes, the surgeon in Stockton, was about to find out that his shadow was far from gone. Book 2, The Interstate Shadow. Chapter 5, The Dapper Entrepreneur. While Gerald Barnbaum was playing God in California, a man named David Brankel was playing the visionary in the heart of Indiana. Bloomington, Indiana, is a town of intellectuals and artists, a place where a man with a sharp suit and a silver tongue can go far. David Brankel arrived like a gale of fresh air. He was 46 impeccably dressed, and possessed a handshake that felt like a contract. He met Phil and Bonnie Sperry, owners of a title company and a prime piece of real estate. "I'm an architect," Brankel told them, spreading a set of blueprints across their desk. "Construction, design, urban development. My company, ACR, is looking for a headquarters that reflects our ethos." He rented a small office in their building. He didn't just work there, he transformed it. He was dapper, smooth, and always had an answer. He was cool, Phil Sperry would later recall, his voice tinged with the bitterness of hindsight. He always knew exactly what to say. Brankel didn't just want an office, he wanted a partnership. He approached Bonnie Sperry with a brilliant idea: trade secrets, an interior design firm. He used the Sperry name, a name built on decades of trust, as his calling card. He went to Sullivan's, the local high-end clothing institution, and ran up a bill. He paid the first $1,700 promptly. "Could I open a house account?" he asked with a winning smile. They said yes. Within weeks, the bill was $8,000. David Brankel looked like $1 million,